All right, everybody, we are going to go ahead and get started. We will be recording this event this evening so that you can share it with anyone else in your networks who may be interested. As a reminder, some housekeeping things before I turn it over to our wonderful panelists. If you would ask any questions that come to mind as you're listening to the presentation using the Q&A function, you can also use the chat function to drop us a line about where you're joining from. But with that, I just wanted to thank everyone for being here for this very timely briefing, and I will turn it over to our president and founder of the American Muslim and Multi-Faith Women's Empowerment Council, Ms. Anila.
Hello, good afternoon. Salamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's important briefing on Syria and the potential changes facing the religious communities there. I'm Anila. I'm the president and the founder of the American Muslim and Multi-Faith Women's Empowerment Council. It's my privilege to introduce my co-discussant today, an esteemed panelist, Nadine Maenza. Ms. Maenza is a globally recognized advocate for religious freedom and human rights and a strong ally in our efforts. She served as the chair of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, the USCIRF, and I know a lot of people know about the USCIRF. She worked there to protect vulnerable communities worldwide, including Syria. Ms. Maenza has traveled extensively to conflict zones, meeting with displaced populations, minority communities, and grassroots leaders. Her work emphasizes the protection of religious and ethnic minorities and fostering inclusive governance structures. In Syria, she has highlighted the plight of Yazidis, Christians, Druze, and others, focusing on the intersection of religious freedom, human rights, and national security. Currently, she serves as president of the International Religious Freedom Secretariat, where she continues to amplify the voices of vulnerable communities. Her unique ability to bridge policymakers, international organizations, and civil society makes her an invaluable voice on the complex realities facing Syria's religious communities. Today, Ms. Maenza will share her insights on the challenges these communities face, the international community's role in supporting them, and the implications for regional stability. As you listen, you can submit any questions in the chat for us to take at the end. Hopefully, we'll have a few minutes for you to do that, Nadine, and thank you so much for joining us, Nadine. I'll let you start off with giving an overall introduction to what you see unfolding before we dive into some key questions. Can you tell us a little bit of an overview of your work in Syria and the situation as you see it? And we're concerned, obviously, with the religious minorities in the region. For our viewers who have asked many questions about them, which we'll ask you later, and they may not also be familiar with those minorities that are there. So we'd love you to give us that overall, just a background on the minorities and what are the key issues you're tracking, as a Syria expert. And as we transition into this new post-Assad era, also do emphasize women. We're all thinking about the women in Syria.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for the generous introduction and, of course, for the important work that you do. It's just invaluable between bridging people on the ground and Washington and other places around the world so that we can get the information what's happening in the places that you visit. So really appreciate your work. Both as a great communicator and advocate for religious freedom. There really is an amazing opportunity now with the fall of this brutal regime of Bashar al-Assad. And so, to give you a sense of the civil war, in 13 and a half years, over half the population was displaced. So 7.2 million people internally displaced and over 6.2 million as refugees. Out of the 1.5 million Christians fled, they say. So only about maybe 2.5 are left. So maybe close to 300, somewhere 100,000, somewhere in that range. I mean, just this week, they found a mass grave of over 100,000 people. So it gives you a sense of just the kind of evil that we've seen. And of course, we've all seen the prisons being opened, people that were held for over 40 years, heartbreaking and encouraging to think there could be a better future for the people of Syria. To give you a sense of the breakdown, there are the population somewhere, it hasn't been a census in obviously over a decade, but a guess of about 22 million. And out of that, 87% is Muslim. So 74% are Sunni and 13% are Alawite, Ismaili, and Shias put together. About 3% are Druze and about 2.5% to 10% is Christian, although it's probably on the lower end of that. To give you a sense, the city of Aleppo used to have 200,000 Christians, now only 20,000 are left. So, you know, we're seeing those kind of numbers, but it's hard to get a real sense. And then there is a growing evangelical church of converts that really are hardly counted in the mix at all. You know, I'll be really measured in how I try to present what we've seen and play out here. But, you know, during the capture of Assad, I mean, of Aleppo, to overthrow Assad's really started in Aleppo. And we immediately had anxious calls from religious minorities there that wanted to flee because they saw these militias entering with guns. And so we reached out to contacts, ended up talking to a representative from the HTS who assured me that they weren't going to target the minorities and to keep everyone home while they were conducting this operation is really interesting because they did protect all the minorities. But they came in with Turkey's Syrian National Army. It's called the SNA. It's been called lots of things, Free Syrian Army. A lot of times we call them Turkish Islamist militias. So it's really the ground force that Turkey has assembled. They now call the Syrian National Army or the SNA. So they joined HTS as they entered Aleppo. And so what ended up happening is once they captured Aleppo, the Syrian National Army was looting. And so they were actually kicked out of Aleppo by the HTS. And so the HTS went on now to go city by city and depose Assad pretty easily, as we saw, and surprisingly so, how the military just dropped their weapons. And to give you a sense of the kind of military Assad has had, I mean, a lot of the times in Northeast Syria, there are different parts of Northeast Syria where they do have some of the regime there. And oftentimes people that are doing humanitarian outreach will actually give humanitarian care to the Assad soldiers too, because they literally are just conscripted men that are only doing it because they have to. They don't have enough food. They don't have good. I mean, so a lot of times, you know, they're not these hardened soldiers that we envision. They're more like victims of this horrible regime. So it was so many of them put their weapons down. So what we saw is as HTS went and took city by city, the Southern Operations Room, a bunch of kind of a lot of unknown militias from the South came up and they actually got to Damascus first. And so then they met in Damascus and obviously took over the regime from there. The SNAs, instead of continuing on with HTS or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which we'll call HTS for now, is the SNAs went north and they captured a region that's been under the Syrian Democratic Forces called the Shabba region. It got very little attention. But why I bring that up is because we saw about 100,000 people flee to Northeast Syria, the cities of Raqqa and Tabqa during that time. And when you see that kind of amount of people leave, obviously something is going on there. So we had some journalists on the ground doing interviews as people arrived. And what we heard is, and I can share the link with you, was horrific crimes that were committed, including several different instances of women being beheaded, mass shootings of civilians, dead bodies on the road, piled and burned, children kidnapped. We have a 3-year-old, a 17-year-old, people shot at cars. A man was pulled out of a car and disappeared. And we still have about a couple hundred missing that we haven't, that we think are detained by the SNA in either Shabba or they went back up to Afrin, an area that they had originally fled from. So most of those who were attacked by the SNA in the Shabba region were IDPs from Afrin, and they were mainly Kurdish Muslims, but also some Yazidis and Christian converts. So we had all of those communities that they gave us their testimonies. And then there are several articles now documenting some of those types of atrocities. Today, Turkish drone strikes killed 2 journalists outside of Kobani as the fighting continues. And in fact, just a few minutes ago, Senators Graham and Van Hollen introduced a bill to put sanctions on Turkey unless Turkey agrees to a ceasefire. So there is definitely an appetite in Washington for this attacks on Northeast Syria to stop, so that all of Syria could try to regroup and form a new Syria for the people. Today, another important things that happened was a U.S. delegation led by the Assistant Secretary of State, Barbara Leaf, met with the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham leader. His name was Mohammed al-Jilani. So most of us know him as Jilani, but he's going now by his birth name of Ahmed al-Shara, which is what I'll call him today. They met together, and now just to understand who he is, he planned this takeover and is to be a caretaker now, him and HTS of Syria, while they wait for this process for a new constitution and a new government. Some of the things from the meeting that came out is a potential of lifting sanctions on Syria, which has been a heavy burden right now, and conditions to remove HTS from the terrorist list. There has been $10 million on al-Shara, was Jelani's head, from the US government as being a terrorist, and they have removed that. So the State Department designated HTS as an entity of particular concern this last year for severe religious freedom violations. It was also recommended to be designated by USCIRF. Now, HTS has run a part of Northwest Syria called Idlib. And to read to you what USCIRF has said about HTS is, quote, despite HTS's robust campaign to distance itself from its past massacres and other crimes against religious minorities, the group's governance in the Northwest advances a Salafi jihadist ideology, disenfranchising Christians and Druze. HTS continued to expropriate property, restrict religious rituals, arrest and detain religious minorities and non-conforming Sunni Muslims, and impose religiously justified dress codes on women. And so that is as of May 2024. So we haven't seen, as I mentioned, HTS has not targeted minorities in this whole operation to depose Assad. It is important to mention there have been some attacks against Christian community, in particular the Greek Orthodox. There was a murder of a couple that were in their home that was pretty gruesome, that suggested that it was targeted. We have attack on a Greek Orthodox archdiocese in Hama, and a desecration of a Hagia Sophia church in Sukalia. I'm probably saying that wrong. And then we did also hear of going door to door in Latvia looking for some Christian leaders. So there have been a few instances of violence, but it doesn't seem to be led by the HTS, more like extreme factions. And so what our recommendation is that the US and international community should not lift sanctions until we're further along in this process and we know that the government is going to include all the people and religions and ethnicities and genders in this new government. But of course, they need severe help right now with humanitarian support, and that should be the way the international community should support them. I've had the opportunity to probably spend, I was thinking about this today, Syria is probably the country I've spent the most time in, other than the United States, in the last 5 years. But normally I'm up in the Northeast, where they have built this really remarkable government that has the best religious freedom conditions in the Middle East, with half the leaders being women. And so what they did is, as they were liberating places from ISIS, they empowered people to build self-governance. I tell a story of meeting with some of the Arab women leaders in Raqqa, and I said to them, so you couldn't leave your home before ISIS, but after ISIS, now you're, a leader in society. It's like, how did your husbands, your guardians, let you be a part of it when the autonomous administration came? And I remember the one woman leader said, like, no one came. Like, we're the women of Raqqa. We built the government of Raqqa. No one came. And, and it really just showed to me that this is really self-governance, where each community runs its own affairs, and the women have 50% of the government official roles. And so it really is, and it overrepresents the religious minorities, which is really interesting. So what you see is this tapestry of Christian, Yazidi, Turkmen, Circassian, just a tapestry of men, women, and religious minorities, even in areas that are majority Muslim, either Arab or Kurdish, still has this really interesting tapestry, which is really a model for us to learn from.
Yes, Nadine, now Yazidis are
Mhm.
Sunnis, if I'm, right.
No,
But they can also be Christian, is that
no,
right?
no, Yazidis are a completely different religion and one of the oldest religions of the world. And so it has, in fact, one of the reasons in Iraq and Syria, but particularly in Iraq, they were targeted the worst by ISIS because they weren't considered people of the book. And so but their ideology is they have a story of a peak of of a peacock that once was a devil turns into a peacock, and because that's part of their story, the extremist elements have called them devil worshippers, which is of course not true. And so that has been one of the reasons they have, when their villages were attacked by ISIS, unlike the Christians and others, they weren't given the option of fleeing or paying a tax, jizya tax. They actually either had to convert or be killed. And so that's why so many of them were killed or kidnapped. And in Syria, I understand maybe 80,000 Yazidis. There are a lot of villages. Unfortunately, most of them are in the areas that Turkey is currently controlling, and many of them have had to flee because of the horrific violence the SNA has committed against them. A lot of them are in northeast Syria, where they are a part of government there. Many leaders are Yazidi leaders, and they have the Yazidi house that I would just visit in October, where they take care of Yazidi communities members. And when the Yazidis that fled the Shabba region showed up in northeast Syria, it was encouraging to me to see so many of the Christian organizations in the West pull money together quickly to get to them because they're particularly vulnerable. I remember when I was there in October and I'd visited the house and I heard the stories of after the last battle with ISIS, the Battle of Baghouz in 2019, is hundreds of Yazidi women had been freed from being captive. At this point, they would have been captive for 5 years. And they had hundreds of girls in this house where they're trying to care for them. They didn't have enough medical supplies and enough food or water, and people were trying to bring supplies to them. And they told me the only support they got was from journalists who were there, that literally got money themselves to help pay for these girls. And I was heartbroken to hear that. And so when I heard about that they were getting, 100 families that had fled from the Shabba region, that all of a sudden they were overwhelmed. And we immediately moved into action. And I was really encouraged to see so many people put money together. The Yazidi community as well as Christian community, we were able to immediately get aid to them and be able to fix up houses for a lot of them to move into and be safe. So, there are ways we can support communities like that. But of course, if you don't know that they need help, it's hard to get involved. So that's why it's so nice to be connected with the people here and be able to know, when we can step in and provide this kind of support for especially the most vulnerable, which would be the Yazidis.
The Yazidis, yes, that's what I was thinking about. And so you think that the HTS is going to live by their word? Because I remember, with post-Afghanistan, the Taliban did the same. They said, we're going to, because of the US pressure and the international pressure, they promised that they would not be persecuting the minorities and the women. And look where they are now. I think there are hardly any minorities left. And even the Shias there are persecuted. And a lot of them have now, just moved over to Pakistan, taken refuge there, the Hazaras. What do you think the world community can do to ensure that these minorities, now we're going back to the Sunnis are going to be in majority and then the Shias are going to be in minority. What can we do to ensure that we as international advocates of religious freedom and minorities and women, what can we do to make sure that the world understands and also highlights the plight of Syria? Because we haven't really heard about it.
Right.
We haven't, and the world has not been highlighting it.
No, you're so right. We really do need to make sure that that these words that are being shared in CNN and high profile interviews, there's actually follow through to them. So yes, we are certainly seeing Jelani or Ahmed al-Shara saying that he is not going to institute harsh conditions in Syria. But he's got a troubling history. And, he was formerly a part of Al-Qaeda. He was arrested by the US, released in 2008, joined ISIS under al-Baghdadi, founded what was originally called Jabhat al-Nusra, or the Nusra Front. And then when they captured Idlib, they changed their name to HTS. And so this is somebody whose followers are self-avowed jihadists with a Salafat. You heard Yusuf talking about their ideology. So what I think is going to be difficult for him is he's promised to protect religious minorities and include them, but also has followers who have always believed this revolution was about putting together an Islamic State. So how does he thread the needle between the promises he's making to protect religious minorities and also to have this state that follows this ideology? So he's got a really difficult task ahead of him. I am alarmed, and I've been assured by HTS folks that it's not going to be under Islamic law. But I don't see how it can go forward in this framing and be a place that would be welcoming for religious minorities. I'm watching closely, and I would love nothing more for him to turn this over to the people of Syria to be a true democracy and step aside and not rule as an authoritarian leader as he did in Idlib. So we not only have the jihadist past, we also have the history of authoritarianism. And normally what we've seen in looking at past revolutions in the Middle East is you have a leader that comes in and always sounds like even Bashar al-Assad, when he took over from his father, they were calling him, the opening of Syria, the new reformer. Hillary Clinton had only wonderful things to say about him. And then it took him a while, usually a couple of years, and they become harsher and harsher and harsher. So the question becomes, is, al-Shara going to hand over power to a democratically elected leader? Or is he going to just assume power and be a benevolent dictator for a while and then take more control? It's hard for us to say. So much hasn't been revealed. I want to believe that I want Syria to have freedom. So I think we're all rooting for Syria to have freedom. But even, the last few days, there have been protests throughout, friendly protests kind of, throughout Damascus and throughout the country of people wanting a secular government. And in fact, today there was some videos posted on social media that showed a man getting up with a gun and talking about freedom and everyone cheering him. And they started talking about religion and everyone started booing him. And so it became pretty clear that the people of Syria want a secular government. They want an inclusive government. And this is a majority, of course, a Muslim country, but they want to practice their faith the way that they see their faith, not the way that HTS sees their faith. And so I think it's important that the US and the international community and all of us stand for the people of Syria to decide their own fate.
Are you hopeful that Turkey is going to have a sort of stabilizing influence in Syria, or is it going to be, promoting the Islamism that, I'm very afraid for the Syrian women, because there was a CNN journalist who was, reporting from Aleppo, and as the HTS came in, they said, cover your hair. And, for me, that's like a very big indicator of Salafism and what we see in Iran today, that, the first, the first indicators are, oppression of minorities and then women, two very vulnerable communities. So what do you see happening with Turkey and its influence there?
Well, so interesting that you mentioned that. So Charles Listener from the Middle East Institute, I'd highly recommend you follow his writings and on social media. He reported that HTS was actually planning this operation to start on October 10th. And they even had their social media accounts ready to go. And Turkey found out about it and stopped it. And he says that just a few days after that, would have been on October 14th, for 3 days, Russia bombed Idlib, killing 13, including 5 children, injuring over 42 people. And I remember seeing that and thinking, why all of a sudden is Russia bombing Idlib? And so Turkey was not supportive when this offensive even started. If you remember, a couple of days in, as Erdogan is calling for talks with al-Assad. And so he really didn't jump on board until HTS it was clear he was deposing, they were deposing Assad. And so Turkey, though, is in a super powerful position now because HTS does need Turkey. They need its military support. They need financial, economic support. But at the same time, Ahmed al-Shara has stood up to Baghdadi. He broke from him and started his own gig. He broke from Al-Qaeda, started his own gig. I mean, he's used to coming in powerful situations with powerful people and then doing his own thing. Is he going to continue this, being his own person in Syria? And what does that mean? Does it mean more HTS, or does it mean, opening to the Western world? So Turkey is definitely a winner in all of this, but not the puppet master that I think it looks like they may be. They have not been a stabilizing force in Syria, as we've seen within constant attacks against northeast Syria. And even, in the Kurdish regions and in their own country, certainly removing, legitimately elected mayors. I think over 100 now have been removed and replaced with their own people. So we don't see that stabilization that we wish we were seeing coming from Turkey right now. But it'll be interesting to see what kind of relationship they will have and what influence they will have.
Yeah. Nadine, have you met with the Kurdish communities, and did you have a chance to ask them, of their fears, if this were to happen with Turkey?
Yeah, so I talk to them very regularly. They're, very concerned about Turkey on their border right now, threatening to invade. And as I mentioned, it's not that they just capture a city like HTS frankly did and start ruling it. They actually go in and commit atrocities against the Kurds and all the other religious and ethnic minorities. So we have seen a different kind of invasion when Turkey invades northeast Syria. And so there's much fear that first of all, there'll be a lot of bloodshed. And they've worked hard to build this democracy. And I think it's important to understand that the people in northeast Syria, what they've done is really quite remarkable. And it is the only way to stop extremism. I this last October, I spent several weeks there, and almost every person I met with, I said, what do you do if you find somebody in your community that embraces an extreme ideology, or you hear about someone? And almost everyone said to me, that's just not happening anymore, even in Raqqa. And so, what I found that to be is the way their government works is it's so inclusive that everyone has a chance to have a microphone. Like it's almost run by town hall all the time. So you have so much say in your own governance that if you have an opinion, you just come to a meeting, you get a microphone and you share it. And so the way they've set up their government with about 100, 120 families as a commune, and then they have 10 different committees, co-chairs, a woman and man, and then vice co-chairs, and they're always different ethnicities or religions. So you have this tapestry of leaders, and they have several of those put together for a sub-district, and then their full-time jobs at this point to be chair or co-chairs of a committee, and then several of those put together a district and then a canton. And so what you have are these different layers of government that are all men and women and different ethnicities and religion representing their own communities. And so because of that almost extreme democracy that they are, it's given everyone a voice. And so what we're seeing is, while ISIS is a threat in northeast Syria, it's not a threat in their own community. It's not their own children joining ISIS. It's ISIS regrouping from the outside. Most of these areas where ISIS is regrouping are kind of the no man lands areas, like outside of Raqqa and below Deir ez-Zor, places where there's really not government there. And those are where they're rising up and they're doing attacks on the Northeast. But internally in their own communities, we're not seeing extremism. And so it just shows me that you cannot beat extremism with just weapons. And that is just such a Western construct that we're just going to make partners with some military and they're going to defeat ISIS. Well, yes, they've been boots on the ground defeating ISIS in a military way, but the real defeating of that ideology has been done through building governance, the way that they have done, and eliminating it from their own communities. And there's so much we can learn from how they did that. And women played a key role, I want to say that the largest role in de-radicalizing northeast Syria. And I think that a lot of communities that are looking whenever I go to some countries and they talk about how to, lower extremism in their own communities, and I look at the table and it's all men, it's like, but women have networks and women are connected and the women know everyone's families, and they, like in Raqqa, they de-radicalized their communities by war rooming, basically all the different houses. They knew everyone and had people visit with different families and really worked through all those issues as a community, house by house, in a way that women and men working together, especially women leading, works, but men sitting around a table talking about this issue endlessly isn't going to actually transform their own communities. So I think there's a lot we can learn from the way that the women in northeast Syria led.
Well, that's very heartening to hear, and it seems that you are you are optimistic that the reconciliation and coexistence can happen between the different religious groups and the ethnic groups in Syria, and the danger lies with the the ISIS coming in from outside. I had also heard, Nadine, in one of the reports that there were Chechen fighters present
Mhm.
in
Yep.
Syria. Did you
Yep.
have any
Mhm.
encounter with them?
I have heard about all sorts of the minorities like that that are in Northeast Syria in the prisons that fought with ISIS, and unfortunately, that's one of the real risks that we have. So we have about 10,000 fighters in, I think, about 24 prisons that fought for ISIS in Northeast Syria. But then we also have Al Hol camp and Al Roj camp. And Al Hol has about 40,000 ISIS family members in it. 16,000 of them are from Syria, the regime areas, and about 6,300 are foreign families. Some of them have been returned to their own countries. The ones left are the most extreme. And I've talked to people in both in Syria and outside that have resettled these families from Out Hole, and they tell me there are among the most radical people that they have ever met. And also the other interesting thing that I was shared was they're usually very educated. So this idea we have of like a manipulated, uneducated person that got taken advantage of and joined ISIS, it isn't the case. Most of the ones in Al Hol right now are actually it's very dedicated to their ideology, and it's a time bomb. It's perhaps the most dangerous camp in the world. There have been beheadings and all sorts of violent stonings in the camp itself. In fact, when I was there in October, just a few weeks before I came, there had been a guards outside the camp. ISIS had attacked three of the guards and actually beheaded two of them and set one of them on fire. And so, this is still a very dangerous situation. And so currently, the Syrian Democratic Forces are protecting and keeping a hold on this. But, if in fact Northeast Syria falls, and it does seem when Turkey is bombing Northeast Syria, they often will bomb the camps and the prisons nearby, the guard stations that just weaken the defenses as well. So this is really ISIS 2.0 waiting to form again, and the international community has been ignoring it because it's too hard to deal with. And so this is another thing that our partners in Northeast Syria have been dealing with.
Are they in the ISIS camps? Are there a lot of them are international and not
Mhm.
Syrian? Because I had
So
also heard that the UK had a lot of ISIS,
yes.
recruits that had gone to Syria. And then how are these countries, will they be able to repatriate them back? Are they going to be accepting these European countries and other Western nations?
Some have and some haven't. In fact, some of the countries who've taken back families or fighters have left some others they feel that are too dangerous to bring back. So what I find is that a country will come in and take half of their people back and the other half they leave there. And so there's still some work to be done to get them all back, but certainly every country, if should take them back. And for instance, in the UK, I know there's several people they won't take because they've taken their citizenship away and they've just decided that they're not their citizens anymore. But that to me is unfair to the people of Northeast Syria. And at this point in time, if they have committed horrific crimes, they should come back and deal with their own judicial system.
Yes. And now, with Iran having lost a lot of influence over there, how do you think the regional powers now, of course, do you think will Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, how are they going to be involved in shaping the situation, and then, of course, affecting the minorities, the women, and what is happening, the governance in Syria, how engaged and involved do you think they will be now?
Well, certainly Iran is the big loser with Assad's fall, and Iran, of course, has been weakened by the strategic attacks from Israel over the last 6 months, last year, as we've seen with in so many places. And so my understanding is they are not on the ground any longer in Syria. But I would not count Iran out. They have a way of worming their way back in. And frankly, they have a very close relationship with Turkey. While often they have opposite goals, other times they work very closely together. So depending on if they're a benefit to Turkey, they could always come back in at some point in time in the places that Turkey controls, which right now Turkey does have the areas they've invaded about 20% of the country. But Saudi Arabia is probably uncomfortable with Turkey's rise in all of this. And Turkey is making it clear. I mean, I think just a few days ago, President Erdogan said, Turkey is bigger than its borders. Our vision extends far beyond. We cannot limit our vision to 782,000 square kilometers, suggesting that Turkey should be enlarging its borders, which of course sent alarm to people all over the world. And I'm sure Saudi Arabia, since they've always kind of seen themselves as a leader of the Sunni Muslim world, to now have Turkey challenging that is certainly concerning for them. The other interesting thing is how Al-Shara has moved so quickly, engaging with the international community. I think in this last week alone, HTS has met with senior officials, of course, from the US, the UN, the UK, France, Qatar, of course, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Oman, Egypt, Kuwait, Bahrain, Jordan, Italy, Iraq, the Czech Republic, Norway, Russia, and Iran. So, and I think that's the race for the US to come to Damascus this week was because of how quickly they are forming relationships with the international community and wanting to move forward, which I'm sure is just causing all sorts of alarm with all the countries in the MENA region, and to figure out how this balance of power is going to play out.
Yes, and what about the role of the US? Of course, we've got a new administration coming. What do you think should we be engaged? Because I remember it was the President Obama's administration, and we were trying to, convince him to set up like a, safe zone for the Syrians. And this is like years ago. What do you think the US's role should be? And what are your suggestions, if at all, for the new administration with regard to Syria?
Well, I think the new administration, it's clearly President Trump said during the war, don't get involved. Let it play out as the Assad is being deposed, which of course was the right move to see how that was all.
Hands out.
Yeah, hands off. Of course, we've our involvement in places like Iraq and other places has had a negative effect in terms of creating leaders for countries. And so this has happened without us. I think what's important for us is, we do have a force in the Northeast. We have kept ISIS at bay, and they have formed this government. They don't need us to nation build for them in the Northeast. And what we should be doing is encouraging this government to really accept the Northeast and the autonomy they have there, because that has been a peaceful place. And they've never wanted independence. They've always wanted to be a part of a future Syria. This is an opportunity for them to be a part of a future Syria, and to go through the process of building this government. And the US should be pushing Turkey and setting consequences for Turkey's invasion. It's time for the war to stop in Syria. The civil war is done. It's been 13 years. I know that there has been, with Turkey accusing Northeast Syria of being terrorists, and that has been the preface that they have been doing these attacks. They are not the PKK, and I do think they should. There have been lots of talks about Turkey and the U.S. encouraging Turkey to settle its own Kurdish problem with the PKK, and they have engaged, I know, with the PKK founder Abdul Öcalan, who's been isolated in prison for years. So now it's an opportunity for Turkey to settle its own Kurdish problem, which also would settle its Kurdish problem with the Northeast. And that's way beyond the Northeast, the problem it has with its own Kurdish population. And so I think that's a bigger problem than just the Northeast, but to use that as a preface to continue attacking the Northeast. If they were to take Northeast Syria, and keep the areas they have, they would control half of Syria. So, I mean, I think that, it's important for us, the integrity of Syria, for Turkey to step back, let the people of Syria decide. And the US could be a big part, the new administration, of just saying to Turkey, no more invasions. Like, let the people of Syria rule Syria.
Yeah.
And in addition, I think standing up for the minorities and making sure they are included in this government. Will this be an Islamic government that where the minorities are second-class citizens? Or
Yeah.
will this be a Syria where everyone is an equal citizen? And I think the US and the international community can play a big role in that. And sanctions are such a heavy burden right now on Syria that the chance that those could be lifted, if in fact they create an inclusive government, could be the kind of motivator they need.
Yes. Do you think still going to be a part of the GCC as Assad was offered?
It's a really good question. I would think so. I would think that they would be really anxious to be involved in the
Yeah.
international community in every way they could be.
Yeah.
What I have seen by reaching out to all the governments they've reached out to and all the diplomacy they've been doing is Syria wants to engage with the international community. And so I do hope there's lots of engagement. It continues because I do think that will help socialize, al-Shara as he oversees Syria for the next 3 months and hopefully change his framing for what Syria could look like. And so that's super important that the international community say they engage with him.
Yes, absolutely. I think so. It's good that the movement came from within Syria,
Agreed.
Afghanistan. We have had other issues. I do feel, though, that I don't know if you agree with me that whenever they are refugees and they are not repatriated, and there are more than 1 million Syrians in Turkey, there's
Yes.
always going to be that back and forth, and it's like Pakistan and Afghanistan. I've been
Yeah.
a big advocate. If your country has been liberated, then you
Mhm.
need to take your people back so they can help in the rebuilding and be
Mhm.
engaged. Because to have these number of millions of people
Yeah.
stay stateless without statuses in these, out of their countries, that becomes, it becomes a very dangerous, like recruiting ground for ISIS
Yep.
and also extremism, not just ISIS.
Yep.
So what do you think will happen to the refugees in Turkey?
Mhm. Well, I do know I've seen pictures of traffic jams coming into Syria from Turkey. So clearly some are trying to come back and see if they could reclaim their homes. Of course, this is complicated. A lot of people who've been gone, their homes are taken by others. We run into that in Northeast Syria with so many who fled or were pushed out of their homes and then returned. So this is the way the international community can support Syria during this time of having sanctions, is by helping refugees to come back, willfully come back. I know there are some countries that are talking about and are already planning to revoke, refugee status for Syrian refugees. I wouldn't recommend that at this point in time. People that have certainly, I understand the desire to send refugees back to Syria, but if they don't have a home to go back to, and they have a job in one country, and you're just picking them up with their kids out of school and just shipping them back to a country they haven't lived in maybe 10 years, have no job, maybe their family's not there. I think people need to take their time. These are human beings, and really have a plan for how people can come back in a safe and a voluntary manner. And
Oh,
so, and I would also make sure that those who do have a real risk of danger of coming back, that their asylum claims are taken into account.
I mean, that's where I see the international community, especially the United Nations, playing a bigger and better role you know, um, in helping them
Yeah.
reestablish themselves. Also, I have another question about Jordan. I didn't talk
Yes.
about Jordan.
Mm.
So, what do you think? I think there were concerns that Jordan had that there would be extremist forces and there might be more uprisings. What do you think Jordan and Syria, how their relationship is going to be, and what will the situation be between Jordan and Syria?
It's a very good question. I know Jordan seems to be very fragile at this point in time, and how a couple of things. First of all, how will this new government interact with Jordan? And so far, we have seen al-Shara giving reassurance to all the countries on its border that it's going to be safe, even Israel, that they don't want to go to war against Israel. But at the same time, it's been a real inspiration to those extreme elements in other countries to see this revolution in Syria. And so, is there, will this inspire similar uprisings in other countries? Has been a real fear that others have had. So I think the United States has a real stake in the stability of Jordan, and so I have no doubt that they're encouraging, and even in the meetings today that may have come up, but certainly keeping Jordan stable, and all the countries in this region is important at this point in time. But there's reasons to be alarmed for Jordan.
I know that's we're looking at all the entire region now with a lot of interest and highlighting everyone's engagement. Nadine, now we're going to move into the question and answer, and
Okay,
we already have some good questions. I'm going to pass it on to Julie
great.
to get our audience engaged.
That sounds great. I hope I can answer them.
I'm sure you have been doing so much work. And actually, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you. I have seen your dedication for so many years, where the world forgot Syria. I know that as an American leader and a woman, I want to thank you. Syrians are going to be happy if they can, establish their new government and get back to, a normal life. That's what we all want in the end. So, Julie, if you're not,
Yeah, I'm here.
Julie's here.
We have a few excellent questions from the audience. So thank you so much, everyone, for your active engagement. This has been fascinating to me, too. We have one question, Nadine, which is coming from Anne, who's asking, what's your sense of to what extent Syria's present national boundaries may be changed or reduced, for example, by Turkish and or Israel incursions and appropriations, or even regions declaring themselves independent and autonomous? So you did touch a little bit on that, but anything to elaborate on?
I think the question is, can there be peace in a peaceful Syria with either federalized or the Northeast being a part of Syria, but being either autonomous or like a state. So I think there's a lot we don't know about how this could play out. Ultimately, I think changing boundaries is a very complicated thing. And, the sovereignty of these countries is protected by many international laws and respected by most countries. And so I don't see lines changing drastically at this point in time. If, however, there time goes on and we're not able to find that peace in Syria, then I think you might see people looking at, I know they've seen maps where there's the Northeast as a separate country, the HTS is a separate country, and then there's a Druze country, so I've seen a lot of proposals for different opportunities. It's only been a few weeks. I think what I'd like to see is stability and peace, and for all the players to be able to talk to each other. And hopefully they can be a Syria where they have these different parts that could all coexist together and work and be peaceful together. And that is what we're hoping for. But I'm watching as closely as all of you are.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely hope for us. We had a question. And so in speaking about mechanisms, I'm going to rephrase the question a little bit and include one of the things that someone's asking. But the question is there a mechanism from our State Department set up for emergency humanitarian aid through USAID, et cetera? I'm also going to ask Nadine if you can comment a little bit on how you view the efficacy of some existing mechanisms, and maybe we can tie that into things that people who are listening in the audience that are concerned about the future of Syria and want to be part of helping things move forward can do to pressure things in the right direction.
Right. So USAID definitely has a mechanism for getting aid into Syria. It had been difficult because Russia and Assad were blocking. Well, really, Russia was blocking it because of Assad, the entrances to bring aid into the country. So it has been very difficult to get aid into Syria for many, many years. Hopefully that will change. I do know that I've been a part of an effort to get some aid into Northeast Syria and the Shai Fund. And so shaifund.org is organizing that with a lot of different organizations right now. So anyone can go there and get aid that's particularly to the Northeast Syria, which is one of the harder places to get aid into. But But ultimately, I'm hopeful that governments will step up and start providing aid through there's so many different mechanisms that they have to be able to support Syria right now, because I do think that will bring some stability. I understood by talking to some of the religious minorities in Homs and in Aleppo that prices went up quadrupled in just this 2 weeks, because all the distributions have been disrupted with this um, regime change. So there isn't enough food in the market, so the prices of everything has gone up. So people that had money to buy food now don't. So there's definitely a shortage of essentials right now in Syria. And so whatever people do quickly to be able to help support them would go a long way towards really helping them have this peaceful transition.
Great. And we have a couple other questions that have come in via some of our other live streaming mechanisms, but I'm going to sort through a few of these. So one that's being asked is, we sort of touched a little bit on maybe what some of the implications of these developments are for neighboring countries. But what do you think are some of the implications for countries that might be closely observing what has happened with the fall of Assad, and what sort of opportunities does that present for other countries to build into more positive international trends, is one of our questions.
Yeah. Oh, I think there's all sorts of good opportunities for other countries that have not been able to have a good relationship with Assad because of the kind of regime that he had. Like I said, I think there should be lots of engagement with this government, even as we don't know. Like I said, I'm not for lifting sanctions at this moment, but humanitarian support has never been under sanctions, first of all. So I think that's important to understand, is there's always been a waiver for humanitarian support. So anyone could come in and bring humanitarian support, even though they are under sanctions. Sometimes you have to have the State Department or someone help you explain that to a bank, or to anyone doing work. But I think Syria has been so high profile that hopefully people understand that at this point in time. But there are a lot of good opportunities for countries to be able to come alongside Syria and help them make the kind of choices they should be making to to build an inclusive society. So I think the more interactions, the better.
Great. We also have a question asking you to forecast about the next administration and sort of your sense of how you feel like they will respond to this international crisis.
Yeah. So, I think this is a good opportunity for President Trump to stand with the people of Syria and say, let the people of Syria, form their own government, and to keep our troops where they are, to keep the stability in Northeast Syria that they currently have, for him to say no to Turkey, to keep violating the ceasefire agreements they keep coming to, and then they violate them again. And so that's the kind of behavior that President Trump doesn't really stand for. And I know that he in the past had a good relationship with Erdogan, which of course is useful, but he's also not somebody that has taken well to that kind of behavior. So things have changed with Turkey. Turkey has threatened, I think Erdogan said to Israel, we're going to do to you what we did to Arsak, which is, of course, talking about the ethnic cleansing of 120,000 Christians by Azerbaijan. So, Turkey has made some threats and been involved in some activities over the last 4 years that I don't think are in line with what President Trump would want at this point in time. So I'm hopeful that he will lay down the law a little bit more for NATO allies in particular standing up to the roles they should have. And one of them is letting Syria choose the future for Syria, and not, overstepping these lines. And we'll see what Congress does with these sanction bills. The bill that just dropped, and it seems to be broad bipartisan support for this bill that would put very tough sanctions on Turkey if they refuse to agree to a ceasefire at this point in time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Nadine. I think we've all, I know I have, and I'm sure many will, and watching live as well, benefit from these insights. This has been absolutely fascinating. I'll turn it over to Anila for some concluding remarks.
Thank you so much, Nadine, for giving us this amazing insight. It's like we're on the ground. I was imagining everything, and I look forward to, and I ask all of you, let's all unite in supporting Syrians in rebuilding their lives. I think
That's
that's
right.
so important, and I pray for lasting stability in the region and its people. But I also want to ask a question. If there is somebody who would like to help Syrians as they are, rebuilding their lives, and, just people wanting to make sure they get food for the families, do you have a name we can trust and send some aid there through it, or
Yes,
donate money?
absolutely. I've been working with the Shy Fund
Nice.
that is supporting um, while a Christian-based organization, the Shy Fund has been organizing aid to Syria. That's probably majority of it is going to the Muslim and the Kurdish communities. So it really is to who's ever most in need. I think they helped organize the support. I talked earlier about the Yazidis, but also for those 100,000 IDPs that fled to northeast Syria that are unable to go back to these regions that are controlled by the Syrian National Army. So right now, I'd highly recommend going to the Shy Fund, and supporting the work that they're doing there, because I don't know of anyone else doing where 100% of that is going to go onto the ground.
Yes, that's always my concern. I wanted to
Mhm.
get to the people.
Yep.
But I want to thank you so much again for answering these questions. And as to all the people that are watching us, thank you so much. We look forward to having you at our next webinar. Please follow us on Facebook, on American Muslim Multi-Faith Women's Empowerment Council on Facebook, and AMWEC, AMMWEC on Instagram. We're also on Twitter, and also our YouTube channel is going to be, if not already, is going to be live streaming this as we end. So we look forward to speaking to you again. To all of you thank you for sending all the questions, and thank you, Nadine, for giving us such an insightful look into Syria. Thank
Thank
you
you so
so
much
much.
for having me. Appreciate it. Thanks for your care for the people of Syria.
Absolutely. This is, we're all one human race, and we
That's
have
right.
to stand up for each other. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.